For 45 years, Michael Jordan kept a secret that could have changed everything. Hidden in his jacket pocket was a yellowed letter that nearly ended his basketball career before it began. The letter contained words so shocking, so unexpected, that Jordan never showed it to anyone. Not his wife, not his children, not even his mother. But in a small community center in Wilmington, North Carolina, the greatest basketball player of all time finally decided to break his silence. What he revealed about his childhood experiences with racism left even hardened journalists speechless. This isn't the story you think you know about Michael Jordan's rise to greatness. This is the story about the letters, the threats, and the impossible choice an 18-year-old had to make between justice and mercy. This is about a system that tried to break him, and the man whose dreams were sacrificed to keep Jordan's secret safe. Most shocking of all, the person who tried to destroy Jordan's career wasn't who anyone expected. The old community center on South 17th Street in Wilmington, North Carolina looked nothing like the fancy buildings where Michael Jordan usually held meetings. Paint peeled from the walls. The carpet was worn thin. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry bees. But this was exactly where he wanted to be. Michael Jordan sat in a plastic chair that creaked under his weight. At 61 years old, he still looked like he could suit up and play basketball. His hands were steady, but his eyes showed something different today. Something heavy. Across from him sat Marcus Williams, a 28-year-old journalist from Charlotte. Marcus had driven 3 hours to get here. He clutched a small recorder in his sweaty palm. This was the biggest interview of his career. For 6 months, Marcus had been investigating racism in youth sports across North Carolina. He had uncovered story after story of talented black athletes being overlooked, ignored, or pushed aside. But he had never expected to get a call from Michael Jordan himself. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Jordan," Marcus said. His voice shook a little. "I know you don't do many interviews anymore." Jordan nodded. "Call me Michael, and you're right. I stopped talking to reporters years ago, but your story, it's important." The room was quiet except for the sound of kids playing basketball in the gym next door. The bouncing ball echoed through the thin walls. Squeak, bounce, squeak, bounce. "You've been writing about racism in sports," Jordan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I've found some troubling patterns. Kids being cut from teams they should have made. College scouts being told wrong information about black players. It's still happening today." Jordan's jaw tightened. It never stopped happening. Marcus leaned forward. This was why he was here. Michael Jordan knew something about racism in sports that no one else did. "In your research," Jordan continued, "did you find anything about Wilmington, about what happened here in the 1970s and 80s? Marcus pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Actually, yes. That's why I called you. I found some old newspaper articles that didn't make sense." He spread the papers on the small table between them. Headlines from the Wilmington Star News. Stories about high school basketball from 1979 and 1980. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to one article. "This story says you were promoted from junior varsity to varsity, but you were clearly the best player in the school. Why would they use the word promoted like it was a favor?" Jordan stared at the newspaper clipping. His face grew dark. "And this one," Marcus continued. "It talks about college scouts being surprised by your talent when they first saw you play. But you had been dominating games for 2 years. How could they be surprised?" Jordan was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car horn honked. A dog barked. Life went on as normal, but inside this small room, something big was about to happen. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. He pulled out a photocopy of a letter. "I found this in the archives at the newspaper office. It was never published." The letter was addressed to the sports editor of the Star News. It was dated March 15, 1980. Jordan's senior year of high school. Dear Editor, Marcus read aloud. I am writing to express concern about the coverage of Michael Jordan's basketball career. Your newspaper has not been telling the whole truth about this young man's experiences in our community. There have been incidents of discrimination that your readers should know about. I believe the public deserves to understand what really happened to one of our most talented athletes. Marcus looked up. The letter isn't signed, but someone was trying to tell the world that you faced racism here in Wilmington. The newspaper never published it. Jordan's hands slowly formed fists on the table. That's not the only letter, Marcus said softly. I found 3 more just like it, all anonymous, all trying to expose what happened to you, but none of them were ever published. The silence in the room grew thick. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Jordan spoke. You want to know the truth about what happened to me in Wilmington? Yes, sir. Jordan reached into his jacket pocket. His hand came out holding an envelope. The paper was yellow with age. The edges were worn from being handled many times over many years. This letter changed my life, Jordan said. I've carried it with me for 45 years. I've never shown it to anyone, not my wife, not my children, not my mother. Marcus stared at the envelope. His hands were shaking now. What does it say? Jordan held the letter like it might explode. Before I show you this, you need to understand something. The story you think you know about my childhood is not the real story. The racism I faced was worse than anyone ever reported, but it was also more complicated. He paused. If I tell you what this letter says right now, you won't believe the rest of my story. You'll think I'm making it up. Marcus felt his heart racing. I'll believe you. No, Jordan said firmly. You won't. Because what really happened to me in Wilmington goes against everything people think they know about racism in sports. It's not the simple story everyone wants to hear. Jordan placed the letter on the table between them but didn't let go of it. I agreed to meet with you because I found out something about your family, something that connects you to my story in a way you don't even know yet. Marcus looked confused. My family. Your father, Tony Williams. He was my friend when we were kids. He was with me when some of the worst things happened. He saw everything. Marcus's eyes went wide. His father had died in a car accident last year. They had never talked much about his childhood. Your father tried to get me to tell this story for decades, Jordan continued. He said other kids were still being hurt by the same system that hurt us. He said my silence was protecting people who didn't deserve protection. Jordan's voice grew heavy with emotion. Your father was right, and now that he's gone, I realize I can't stay quiet anymore. He picked up the letter again. But I'm going to tell you the whole story first, every detail, every painful moment. And then at the end, I'll read you this letter, because once you hear what it says, you'll understand why I kept quiet for so long. Jordan looked directly into Marcus's eyes, and you'll understand why I can't keep quiet anymore. The bouncing basketball in the next room had stopped. The silence was complete. Are you ready to hear a story that will change how you think about racism, forgiveness, and the price of success? Jordan asked. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to work. Good, Jordan said, because this story starts when I was 9 years old and it doesn't have the ending you expect. He leaned back in his creaky plastic chair. His eyes looked past Marcus, past the peeling walls of the community center, into a memory from almost 50 years ago. 1975. I was 9 years old and living on Gordon Road here in Wilmington. My family had moved here from Brooklyn when I was just a baby. My dad, James, worked at General Electric. My mom, Dolores, had a job at the bank downtown. Marcus adjusted his recorder to make sure it was picking up every word. Back then, I didn't care about basketball at all. Baseball was my game. I wanted to be the next Reggie Jackson. Every single day after school, I'd come home and throw a baseball against the side of our house for hours. Jordan smiled for the first time since Marcus had arrived. My older brother Larry would catch for me in the backyard. We'd pretend I was pitching in Yankee Stadium. Bottom of the ninth, World Series on the line. The Jordan family was one of only 3 black families on our street, Jordan continued. Most of our neighbors were nice enough. They'd wave when we walked by. Some even brought us cookies when we first moved in. His smile faded, but I noticed things, little things that didn't make sense to a 9-year-old kid. Like what? Marcus asked. When I went to Miller's Corner store to buy candy, the clerk would watch me the whole time, not just glance over, really watch me, like he thought I might steal something. But when white kids came in, he'd keep reading his newspaper. Jordan rubbed his chin. Or when I rode my bike through certain neighborhoods, some parents would call their kids inside. They'd peek through their curtains as I rode past. I didn't understand it then. I just thought some people were unfriendly. Jordan described his elementary school, DC Virgo Elementary. He was one of the smartest kids in his class. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind white woman who encouraged all her students. Mrs. Henderson saw how much I loved baseball. In the spring of 1975, she told me I should try out for the school team. I was so excited I could barely sleep. The coach was Mr. Patterson. He was a tall white man with a thick mustache. He'd played baseball in college. All the kids respected him. Jordan's voice grew quieter. The first practice was on a Tuesday after school. I showed up with my glove and cleats. I was ready to show everyone how good I was. There were about 20 kids trying out. Maybe 15 white kids and 5 black kids, including me. Mr. Patterson divided us into groups to run drills. Jordan paused. Marcus could hear the kids still playing in the gym next door, but their voices seemed farther away now. Something strange happened during those drills. Mr. Patterson put all the black kids in the outfield, every single one of us. The white kids got to try playing infield positions. Shortstop, second base, first base. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just organizing by height or age. But then we started batting practice. Jordan's hands clenched slightly. The white kids got to bat first. They each got about 10 swings. Good pitches right down the middle. Mr. Patterson would give them tips. Keep your eye on the ball, Tommy. Nice swing, David. When it was the black kids' turn, something was different. The pitches weren't as good. They were high or low or way outside. When we missed, Mr. Patterson didn't give us tips. He just said, "Next batter." After practice, I stayed behind. I wanted to ask Mr. Patterson if I could try pitching. That was my best skill. Jordan's voice grew tight. I walked up to him and said, "Coach Patterson, could I try pitching next practice? I'm really good at it." He looked down at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe next time, son. We need to see how you do in the outfield first." "But I'm a pitcher," I said. "That's my position." Mr. Patterson's face changed, got a little harder. "Son, you play where I tell you to play. The outfield is a good place for you. Lots of running." Marcus frowned. What did he mean by that? I didn't know then. I thought he meant I was fast, which I was. But looking back, I think he meant something else. Something about black players being athletic instead of smart. Jordan shook his head. I walked home from practice feeling confused. Baseball was supposed to be fun, but something felt wrong. That night at dinner, my dad asked how practice went. I told him it was fine, but I guess my face said something different. "What's wrong, Mike?" he asked. I didn't want to complain. So I just said, "I don't think Coach Patterson likes me very much." Jordan's voice grew softer. My dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My mom looked up from her plate. They gave each other a look. The kind of look parents give when they understand something their kid doesn't. "Why do you think that?" my dad asked carefully. "He won't let me try pitching, and he only puts the black kids in the outfield." The dinner table got very quiet. My little sister Roslyn kept eating, but my parents had stopped completely. "Maybe next practice will be different," my mom said finally. But my dad was thinking harder. I could see it in his eyes. He was angry about something but trying not to show it. After dinner, I went to my room to do homework, but I could hear my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but I caught some words. "Same thing that happened to me. Need to be careful. Don't want to make trouble." Jordan looked directly at Marcus. That night, I heard my dad make a phone call. I was supposed to be asleep, but I snuck to the top of the stairs to listen. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard him say, "It's happening again just like we thought it would. And then, we need to document this just in case." Document what? I wondered. It was just baseball practice. Jordan's eyes grew distant again. The next morning, my dad seemed different, more serious. He sat me down before school. "Mike," he said, "sometimes in life people will treat you differently because of how you look. It's not right and it's not your fault, but it's something you need to know about." I didn't really understand what he meant. I was just a 9-year-old kid who wanted to pitch. "Should I quit the baseball team?" I asked. My dad thought for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "No, son, you don't quit. You get so good that they can't ignore you. You make yourself impossible to overlook." Jordan's voice grew strong again. That became my approach to everything, not just baseball, everything. Marcus was scribbling notes as fast as he could. What happened at the next practice? Jordan's expression darkened. The next practice was when I learned that getting better isn't always enough. Sometimes the system is rigged in ways a 9-year-old can't overcome. He glanced at the yellowed letter still sitting on the table between them. But that's not the worst part of the story, not even close. Marcus felt his heart beat faster. What happened? I'll tell you, but first, you need to understand something about your father. Tony Williams was there that day. He saw everything that happened next. Jordan's voice grew heavy, and what he saw changed both of our lives forever. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. The recorder sat between them, capturing every word. Summer of 1976. I was 10 years old. The city had just opened a brand new public swimming pool at Hugh Morton Park. It was beautiful. Crystal blue water, white diving board, snack bar with cold drinks. Jordan's eyes grew distant. For kids in Wilmington, that pool was like Disney World. We'd been swimming in the Cape Fear River or not at all. Finally, we had a real pool. Tony Williams lived 3 blocks from me. His family had moved to Wilmington around the same time as mine. Tony was a year older than me, but we became best friends that summer. Marcus felt a chill hearing his father's name. He'd never heard these stories. Opening day was June 15, 1976. Tony and I had been saving our allowance for weeks, 25 cents to get in. We had our swimming trunks, our towels, and big smiles on our faces. Jordan paused. The sound of children playing basketball next door seemed to fade. We rode our bikes to the pool that morning, got there right when it opened at 10 o'clock. There was already a line of families waiting to get in. The pool was packed with white families, kids running around, parents setting up chairs, everyone excited about this new addition to our town. Tony and I got in line just like everyone else. We had our quarters ready. We'd been talking about this day for weeks. Jordan's jaw tightened. When we got to the front of the line, there was a teenage lifeguard taking money. His name was Danny Mitchell. He was maybe 16 years old, with blonde hair and a whistle around his neck. Tony stepped up first. He held out his quarter and said, "2 admissions, please." Danny looked at us for a long moment. Then he said, "Pools at capacity." Marcus frowned. "Capacity?" That's what we thought too. Tony looked confused. "What does that mean?" "Means we're full up," Danny said. "No more room." I looked past the fence into the pool area. There was plenty of room. Kids were playing, but it wasn't crowded at all. Tony pointed this out. "But those kids just went in," he said, nodding toward 2 white boys who had entered right before us. Danny's face got harder. "Pools at capacity," he repeated. Jordan's hands formed fists on the table. We stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do. Then Tony asked, "When will there be room?" "Don't know," Danny said. "Might be full all day." So we waited. Tony and I sat on the curb across the street watching the pool. For an hour, we watched families come and go. White families went in with no problem. But every time a black family approached the gate, Danny would say the same thing: "Pools at capacity." There was an older black man who came with his 2 young kids. Danny turned him away too. The man started to argue, but Danny called over another lifeguard. The man took his kids and left. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. "What did you and Tony do?" We kept waiting. We thought maybe it really was full and space would open up later. Around noon, something changed. A college-aged girl showed up for her shift. Her name was Sarah Coleman. She was home from East Carolina University for the summer. Sarah saw us sitting across the street with our towels and swimming trunks. She walked over and asked, "Why aren't you boys swimming?" "The pool's full," I said. Sarah looked confused. She looked back at the pool, then at us. "It doesn't look full to me." Tony explained what Danny had told us. Sarah's face got angry. "Wait right here," she said. We watched her march over to Danny. They had a heated conversation. We couldn't hear what they said, but Sarah was pointing at us and shaking her head. Finally, Sarah walked back over to us. "Come on, boys, let's get you swimming." We were so excited. We ran to the gate, paid our quarters to Sarah, and rushed into the pool area. Jordan's voice grew quiet, but that's when the real nightmare began. The moment Tony and I jumped into the pool, something terrible happened. White parents started pulling their children out of the water. Not all of them, but enough that it was obvious. One mother grabbed her daughter's arm and said loudly, "Come on, honey. We're leaving. I didn't pay money for you to swim in dirty water." Marcus winced. "She said that right in front of you." Oh, that was just the beginning. Another parent walked up to Sarah and demanded his money back. "This isn't what we paid for," he said. Sarah tried to calm everyone down, but more parents were getting upset. Not all of them, but enough to make a scene. Tony and I tried to swim like normal kids. We dove underwater, played Marco Polo, tried to have fun, but we could feel eyes on us the whole time. Then a group of white teenagers showed up. 3 boys, maybe 14 or 15 years old. They got in the pool near us and started playing rough. At first, it seemed like normal pool games, splashing, dunking each other. But then they started targeting us. They would swim underwater and grab our legs, trying to pull us down. When we tried to swim laps, they would block our path. When we got out to rest, they would cannonball right where we'd been sitting, soaking our towels. Jordan's voice grew harder. The lifeguard saw everything. Danny was back on duty by then. He watched the whole thing and did nothing. Sarah tried to help. She blew her whistle a few times and told the teenagers to calm down. But every time she looked away, they started again. After about an hour of this, I'd had enough. I was 10 years old, but I wasn't going to let these bullies ruin our day. I swam over to the biggest kid and said, "Leave us alone. We're not bothering anybody." The kid laughed. "This is our pool," he said. "You don't belong here." "It's a public pool," Tony said, swimming over to back me up. "We paid just like you did." "Yeah," the kid said. "Well, maybe you should ask for your money back." That's when he shoved me underwater and held me down. Marcus gasped. "He tried to drown you." I was underwater for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. I fought my way back to the surface, gasping and choking. Tony immediately swam over to help me. "Hey," he yelled at the kid, "what's wrong with you?" The teenager just laughed. His friends were laughing too. "Maybe you boys should find somewhere else to swim," one of them said. I was scared, but I was also angry. Angrier than I'd ever been in my whole life. That's when Sarah appeared. She'd seen the whole thing. "That's enough," she yelled. "Out of the pool, all three of you." The teenagers protested, but Sarah was firm. "Out now and don't come back today." As they climbed out, one of them looked back at us and said, "This isn't over." Jordan rubbed his forehead. Tony and I stayed in the pool for another hour. Sarah kept a close eye on us, but the fun was gone. We felt like everyone was watching us, waiting for us to leave. Finally, we got out and gathered our things. As we were walking toward the exit, I heard something that broke my heart. A little white girl, maybe 6 years old, asked her mother, "Mommy, why did those boys make the water dirty?" Her mother shushed her, but the damage was done. That little girl thought Tony and I had somehow contaminated the pool just by being there. Jordan's voice cracked slightly. We rode our bikes home in silence. When I got to my house, my mom was waiting on the front porch. "How was the pool, baby?" she asked. I tried to say it was fun, but I started crying instead. The whole story came pouring out. My mom held me while I cried. When I finished, she was crying too. That night, I heard my parents talking again. This time, their voices were angrier. "This has got to stop," my mother said. "Our children shouldn't have to face this." "Maybe we should move back to Brooklyn," my father replied. "Running away won't solve anything," my mom said, "but something needs to change." Jordan looked at Marcus with sad eyes. Tony and I never went back to that pool, not once during that entire summer. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 days later, something happened that made the pool incident look like nothing. Marcus held his breath. What happened? Jordan glanced at the letter on the table. That's when I learned that racism isn't always about hate. Sometimes it's about fear, and fear can be even more dangerous. Marcus adjusted his recorder, making sure every word was being captured. What happened 3 days after the pool? My father made a decision that changed my life. He decided I needed to learn how to fight back, but not with my fists. Jordan's eyes softened slightly. Dad signed me up for basketball at the YMCA downtown. I didn't want to play basketball. I still dreamed of being a baseball player like Reggie Jackson. "Basketball is different," my dad said. "It's faster. It's about individual skill as much as teamwork. And most importantly, it's harder for coaches to hide talent." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. Jordan described walking into the old YMCA building on Market Street for the first time. The gym smelled like sweat and old wood. The floorboards creaked under his feet. The coach was a young black man named Robert Williams. Everyone called him Buzzy. He was maybe 25 years old, tall and skinny, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Marcus perked up. Williams, any relation to my family? Jordan smiled. Buzzy was Tony's older cousin. That's how Tony and I ended up on the same team. Buzzy had grown up in Wilmington. He'd experienced the same kind of racism Tony and I were facing, but he had a different way of dealing with it. On our first day of practice, Buzzy gathered all 12 kids on the team around center court. We sat in a circle, looking up at him. "Boys," he said, "I want you to understand something about basketball. This game doesn't care what color you are. The ball doesn't know if you're black or white. It only knows if you can make it go in the basket." He bounced a basketball on the floor. "See this ball? It doesn't have prejudice. It doesn't have opinions. It just follows the laws of physics. You shoot it right, it goes in. You shoot it wrong, it doesn't." Jordan's voice grew stronger. Buzzy taught us that excellence was the best weapon against prejudice. "You can't argue with a scoreboard," he'd say. But I was terrible at first, really terrible. I was small for my age, maybe 4 feet 8 inches tall. I could barely dribble without looking at the ball. My shots clanged off the rim like rocks. The other kids were better than me. Tony was naturally athletic. Some of the older boys had been playing for years. I felt out of place. After our third practice, I told my dad I wanted to quit and go back to baseball. He sat me down in our living room. "Mike," he said, "quitting is easy, but easy doesn't teach you anything. What did you learn about yourself today?" I thought about it. I learned I'm not very good at basketball. "Yet," my dad said. "You're not very good yet, but what else did you learn?" I thought harder. I learned that I hate losing more than I like winning. My dad smiled. "Now that's something you can work with." Jordan's hands moved as he talked, like he was still dribbling a basketball. So I started practicing. Every single day after school, I'd go to the outdoor court behind our house and shoot baskets until it got dark. Tony would come over sometimes. He was naturally better than me, but he didn't practice as much. "Why do you work so hard?" he'd ask. "Because I'm tired of being bad at things," I'd tell him. Jordan described how Buzzy worked with each player individually. He never raised his voice. He never embarrassed anyone, but he demanded effort. Buzzy saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. After practice one day, he pulled me aside. "Michael," he said, "you've got something special. Not your shooting that needs work. Not your dribbling that needs work too, but you've got fire in you. You hate losing more than you love anything else." "Is that good?" I asked. "It can be," Buzzy said. "Fire can burn you up or it can fuel you. Which one you choose is up to you." Jordan paused. Marcus could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, but the community center felt isolated from the rest of the world. Our first game was against a team from the north side of town, all white kids. I was nervous, but excited too. The game was played at their school gym. When our team walked in, I noticed something immediately. The referees were both white. The scorekeeper was white. Everyone in the stands was white except for our parents. During warm-ups, I heard comments from the crowd. "Look how fast they are. They're so athletic. This should be interesting." The words sounded like compliments, but something about the way they said them felt wrong. Jordan's expression darkened. The game started, and immediately I understood what my father meant about basketball being different. The referees called fouls on us that they didn't call on the other team. When we drove to the basket, they'd call charging. When we played defense, they'd call reaching. But here's what was different from baseball. In basketball, you can still win despite bad calls. You just have to be so much better that the refs can't stop you. By halftime, we were down by 8 points. In the locker room, some of our players were complaining about the referees. Buzzy listened to all the complaints. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Boys, you can spend your energy complaining about unfairness, or you can spend it being so good that unfairness doesn't matter. Your choice." In the second half, we played like we were possessed. Tony scored 12 points. I scored 8, including a shot at the buzzer that won the game. As we celebrated, I looked up in the stands. Our parents were cheering, but the white parents looked shocked. Some looked angry. Walking to the car after the game, I heard one white parent say to another, "These kids play like animals. No discipline at all." That comment confused me. We'd played great basketball. We'd won fair and square. Why would someone call us animals? Jordan looked directly at Marcus. That night, I asked my father about it. For the first time in my life, he explained racism in a way I could understand. "Son," he said, "some people judge others by the color of their skin instead of what's in their heart. They see a young black boy playing basketball with passion and skill, and instead of admiring it, they fear it." "Why would they fear it?" I asked. "Because if you're as good as you showed tonight, it means their children might not be as special as they thought. Some people can't handle that truth." I was quiet for a long time. Finally, I asked, "Dad, will it ever get better?" My father hesitated before answering. When he did speak, his words would guide me for the rest of my life. "I hope so, son, but you might have to be the one to make it better." Jordan's voice grew heavy again. I didn't understand the weight of those words then, but I do now. That conversation planted a seed in my mind. Maybe basketball wasn't just about winning games. Maybe it was about proving something bigger. Jordan glanced at the letter again. Unfortunately, not everyone wanted me to prove anything. Some people were willing to go to great lengths to stop me. Marcus felt his heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I mean that as I got better at basketball, the resistance got stronger, and it came from places I never expected." Marcus leaned forward, sensing they were approaching something crucial in the story. By the time I was 16, I had grown to 6 feet 3 inches. I was attending Sly A. Laney High School. Basketball had become my life. Jordan's voice grew stronger as he remembered his teenage years. "I practiced every morning before school. I practiced every afternoon after school. I played pickup games on weekends. Tony and I would play one-on-one until we couldn't see the ball anymore." Everyone in Wilmington knew about me by then. People would come to YMCA games just to watch me play. College scouts started showing up when I was just a sophomore. The varsity coach at Laney was a white man named Clifton Herring. Everyone called him Pop. He'd been coaching high school basketball for 15 years. Marcus recognized the name from his research. Pop Herring was pretty well known, wasn't he? Very well known. He'd coached several players who went on to play college basketball. Parents respected him. Players wanted to play for him. Jordan's expression grew darker. But Pop Herring had never had a black starting player, not once in 15 years of coaching. When I was a sophomore, I dominated the JV team. I averaged 28 points per game. I was clearly ready for varsity. Tryouts for varsity were held in early November 1979. I was nervous but confident. I'd been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Jordan described the tryouts in detail. The gym was packed with hopeful players. Some were seniors who'd been on JV the year before. Others were underclassmen like Michael who thought they were ready to move up. The tryouts lasted 3 days. We scrimmaged against each other, ran drills, did conditioning tests. I outplayed everyone, not just the other sophomores, everyone. I scored more points than anyone in the scrimmages. I grabbed more rebounds. I had more assists. Other players' parents who watched the tryouts told their friends that I was the best player they'd ever seen. On the last day of tryouts, Pop Herring told us the varsity roster would be posted outside his office the next morning. Jordan's hands clenched as he remembered that day. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept imagining my name on that list, imagining wearing the varsity uniform, imagining playing in front of packed gyms. The next morning, I got to school early. There was already a crowd of players and parents around the posted roster. I pushed through the crowd and looked at the list. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Jordan paused, the pain still visible in his eyes 45 years later. My name wasn't on it. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What? Players I had dominated in tryouts made the team. Seniors who couldn't keep up with me made the team, but my name was assigned to the junior varsity list. I stared at that paper in complete disbelief. Other kids were celebrating or complaining, but I couldn't move. Finally, I walked to Pop Herring's office. He was sitting at his desk, eating a donut and reading the newspaper. "Coach Herring," I said as politely as I could, "I think there might be a mistake with the rosters." He looked up at me with cold eyes. "No mistake, Jordan." "But sir, I outplayed everyone in tryouts. The other coaches said so. Even some parents mentioned it." Pop Herring put down his newspaper. "Son, basketball isn't just about individual talent. It's about understanding your role. It's about fitting into a system." "I can fit into any system, coach. Just give me a chance." "You're not ready for varsity basketball," he said firmly. "Maybe next year." Jordan's voice grew tight with old anger. I knew this wasn't about basketball ability, but I was just 16 years old. I didn't know how to fight back. I walked home from school in a daze. My parents could see something was wrong the moment I walked through the door. When I told them what happened, my mother started crying. My father's face went through about 5 different emotions before settling on rage. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," my mother said. My father was pacing around the living room. 16 years, he said. 16 years Pop Herring has been coaching and he's never started a black player. Not one." Jordan looked at Marcus. That night, someone slipped an envelope under our front door. Marcus felt a chill. The letter. No, not the letter I showed you earlier. This was different, but it was the beginning of something much worse. Jordan described finding the envelope the next morning before school. His name was written on it in handwriting he didn't recognize. I opened it on my way to school. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made my blood run cold. What did it say? Jordan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. It said, "Boy, you think you're so good at basketball. You think you deserve to play with white kids. You don't belong on that team. You don't belong in this town. If you keep pushing where you don't belong, bad things might happen to you and your family. This is your only warning." Marcus gasped. "Someone threatened your family." At the bottom of the letter, someone had drawn a picture of a basketball hoop. But instead of a net hanging from the rim, they'd drawn a noose. Jordan's hands were shaking slightly as he remembered. I stood on the sidewalk reading that letter over and over. I looked around to see if someone was watching me. The street was empty, but I felt like eyes were on me everywhere. I thought about telling my parents, but I was scared. What if this person was serious? What if something happened to my family because of my basketball dreams? For the first time in my life, I seriously considered quitting basketball completely. Jordan described the next few weeks as the darkest of his young life. He played JV games with no enthusiasm. His grades started slipping. He barely talked to Tony or his other friends. But every night, I'd think about what Buzzy Williams had taught me. Excellence is the best answer to prejudice. And I'd think about what my father said. You might have to be the one to make it better. Finally, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of quitting, I decided to use my anger as fuel. Every racist comment, every unfair call, every reminder that some people didn't want me to succeed became motivation. I started practicing with obsessive intensity. 3 hours before school, 4 hours after school, 6 hours on weekends. By the end of my sophomore year, I had grown 4 more inches and improved dramatically. It became impossible for Pop Herring to ignore me anymore. Jordan's voice grew stronger. The local newspapers started writing about the JV sensation. College scouts began showing up to watch junior varsity games instead of varsity games. Pop Herring was getting pressure from parents, from the school administration, from local businessmen who wanted to see the best players on varsity. At the end of the school year, Pop Herring called me into his office. Marcus held his breath. What did he say? He had a strange look on his face, part anger, part resignation. He said, "Jordan, we need to talk about next year." "Yes, sir," I said. "You'll be on varsity, but I want you to understand something. This team has a certain way of playing, a certain culture. If you can't adapt to that culture, you won't play much." I wanted to ask him what he meant by culture, but I was just happy to finally get my chance. Jordan glanced at the yellowed letter on the table. What I didn't know was that making varsity would bring a whole new level of resistance, and some of that resistance would come from the last person I expected. Marcus's heart was racing. Who? Jordan's voice grew heavy with old pain. The person who sent the letter I'm carrying today. The letter that almost made me quit basketball forever. Marcus gripped his recorder tighter. They were getting close to the heart of the story. But before I tell you about that letter, you need to understand what I discovered that summer. Something that opened my eyes to how big this problem really was. Jordan described the summer of 1980 between his sophomore and junior years. He was working out constantly, preparing for his first season on varsity. One day in July, Tony and I were shooting baskets at the outdoor court behind the community center. A man we'd never seen before walked up and introduced himself. His name was Fred Lynch. He was a black businessman who owned a small construction company in town. Fred had been watching us play. "You boys are pretty talented," he said. "Especially you, Michael. I've been hearing about you all over town." Fred asked if we'd ever heard of other young black athletes having trouble making teams or getting fair treatment. Tony and I looked at each other. We thought our experiences were unique. "It happens to other kids too?" I asked. Fred's expression got serious. "Boys, what you've experienced is happening all over North Carolina, all over the South. It's been happening for years." Jordan explained how Fred Lynch opened their eyes to a much bigger picture. Fred had been quietly documenting cases of discrimination against black athletes for almost 10 years. He showed us a box full of letters, newspaper clippings, and testimonies from families across the state. There was a story about a black quarterback in Charlotte who was moved to running back despite having the best arm on the team. A basketball player in Raleigh who was cut from varsity, even though he led the JV team in every statistical category. The more stories Fred showed us, the angrier I got. This wasn't just happening to me, it was a system. Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of system?" Fred called it the pipeline problem. Talented black athletes were being systematically held back, discouraged, or pushed out of sports programs. The goal was to limit how many black players made it to the college level. But why? I asked Fred. If we're good players, wouldn't coaches want us to help their teams win? Fred shook his head. Winning isn't always the most important thing to some people. Some coaches and administrators are more worried about keeping their programs looking a certain way. Jordan described meeting other black athletes that summer through Fred Lynch's network. Fred introduced me to older players who had faced the same challenges. Charles Scott, who had broken barriers at the University of North Carolina. Phil Ford, who dealt with racism throughout his college career. But the stories that hit me hardest were about the players who never got their chance at all. Talented kids who were discouraged so much that they quit sports entirely. One story really stayed with me. A kid named Jerome Washington from Fayetteville. He was supposed to be incredible at basketball, but his high school coach buried him on the bench for 3 years. Jerome finally quit and never played again. "Where is Jerome now?" I asked. "Working construction," Fred said. "Never went to college, never got to find out how good he could have been." Jordan's voice grew determined. That's when I realized my basketball success wasn't just about me anymore. Every time I succeeded, I was opening a door for other black athletes. Fred taught us how to document everything. Keep records of unfair treatment. Write down exactly what coaches and referees said. Save newspaper clippings that showed bias. "Evidence is power," Fred told us. "Someday, someone might be brave enough to tell these stories publicly. When that day comes, we need to have proof." Jordan described how this network of black families and community leaders worked like an underground railroad for athletes. They shared information about which coaches were fair and which ones weren't. They warned families about programs to avoid. They celebrated when barriers were broken. Most importantly, they taught young athletes like me how to survive in hostile environments. Fred gave me specific advice about dealing with Pop Herring. "Coach Herring isn't the worst out there," he said, "but he's set in his ways. You'll have to prove yourself twice as much as any white player." "How do I do that?" I asked. "Be so good that cutting you would be embarrassing for him. Make yourself impossible to ignore." Jordan explained how he spent that summer transforming his game. "I worked on every weakness Fred and the other mentors identified. My ball handling, my jump shot, my basketball IQ. I studied game film of college players." Tony was part of this journey too. We pushed each other every day, but I could see that the pressure was affecting him differently than it affected me. One evening, after a particularly hard workout, Tony sat down on the court looking exhausted. "Mike," he said, "what if we're not good enough? What if all this work doesn't matter because some people will never give us a fair chance?" I didn't have a good answer for him. The truth was, I was scared of the same thing. But then I remembered something Buzzy Williams had taught us years earlier. The ball doesn't care what color you are. It only knows if you can play. Then we just have to be so good that the ball speaks for us, I told Tony. Jordan's voice grew heavier. By the end of that summer, I had grown to 6 feet 5 inches. I was stronger, faster, and more skilled than I'd ever been. But I had also learned something that would haunt me for decades. The system we were fighting wasn't just about individual racist coaches or players. It was bigger than that. There were people in positions of power who had a vested interest in keeping things the way they were. And some of those people were willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain the status quo. Jordan glanced at the letter on the table. including sending anonymous letters designed to destroy a teenager's confidence and dreams. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Is that when you got the letter you're carrying? No, that letter came later, during my junior year, from someone I trusted, someone I never suspected. Jordan's expression grew pained. But first, I had to survive my first season on varsity, and Pop Herring made sure that wouldn't be easy. He kept his promise to put me on the team, but he also made good on his threat about adapting to the culture. Marcus could hear the bitterness in Jordan's voice. What did he do? He tried to break my spirit, game by game, practice by practice. He wanted to prove that I wasn't varsity material, even if it meant hurting his own team's chances of winning. Jordan looked directly at Marcus. Your father, Tony, saw all of this happening. He was there for every practice, every game. He watched Pop Herring try to destroy me. And he also saw what that treatment did to other black players who came after me. Players who weren't strong enough to survive what I survived. Marcus felt a chill. Like who? Jordan's voice broke slightly. Like Tony himself. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What happened to my father? Jordan took a deep breath before continuing. Your father was incredibly talented, Marcus. Maybe not quite at my level, but good enough to play college basketball. Good enough to get a scholarship. But Tony came along 5 years after me. By the time he was ready for varsity, I was already famous at UNC. Pop Herring couldn't ignore me anymore because the whole state was watching. Jordan's voice grew heavy with guilt, but Tony didn't have that protection. Marcus's hands were shaking as he held the recorder. He had never heard these stories about his father's basketball career. Let me back up and tell you what happened during my junior year first, because understanding that will help you understand what your father went through later. Jordan described his first season on varsity as a mixture of triumph and torture. Pop Herring kept his word. I was on the team, but he made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. During practice, he would run plays that didn't use my strengths. When I scored in games, he rarely praised me. When I made mistakes, he'd make examples of me in front of the whole team. But the most frustrating part was my playing time. Despite being clearly the best player on the team, I'd often start games on the bench. Jordan explained how Pop Herring would justify these decisions to local reporters. He'd say things like, Jordan is still learning to play within our system, or we need players who understand their role. The local newspaper, the Wilmington Star-News, rarely questioned these explanations. They'd write articles about games where I scored 25 points in limited minutes, but the headlines would focus on other players. Marcus frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't they want to promote their best player? Because promoting me meant acknowledging that a black player was the star of the team. Some people in town weren't ready for that. Jordan described a particular game that changed everything. It was against New Bern High School, Laney's biggest rival. We were losing by 15 points at halftime. I had played only 8 minutes and scored 12 points. The crowd was getting restless. In the locker room, Pop Herring gave his usual speech about playing as a team and sticking to the game plan. But then something unexpected happened. The team captain, a senior named Bobby Mitchell, spoke up. Coach, Bobby said, we need to play Michael Moore. He's our best player. Pop Herring's face went red. I decide who plays and when they play. But coach, another player said, we're getting killed out there. Jordan's voice grew stronger as he remembered that moment. For the first time, my white teammates were standing up for me. Pop Herring looked around the locker room. He could see that he was losing the team. Finally, he said, fine. "Jordan, you'll start the second half." I played the entire second half, scored 28 points. We won the game by 12. After that game, it became impossible for Pop Herring to keep me on the bench. The other players expected me to play. The crowd expected me to play. Even some local business leaders started asking questions. Jordan described how his playing time increased throughout the season, but Pop Herring's attitude never changed. He'd give me dirty looks during timeouts. He'd blame me for losses even when I played well. He'd make sarcastic comments about my individual style of play. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. Pop Herring wasn't just reacting to me personally. He was fighting against something much bigger. Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Basketball was changing in the 1980s. Players like Magic Johnson and Julius Erving were making the game more athletic, more creative, more individual. Pop Herring had grown up with a different style of basketball. Slower, more methodical, more team-oriented. When he looked at me play, he saw everything he thought was wrong with the direction basketball was going. Jordan's expression grew thoughtful. I represented change, and change scared him. By the end of my junior year, college scouts were flocking to our games. Roy Williams from UNC came to see me play. Dean Smith himself showed up twice. Pop Herring tried to sabotage my recruitment. He told college coaches that I was difficult to coach and had attitude problems. Some coaches believed him and stopped recruiting me, but Dean Smith was different. Jordan smiled for the first time in several chapters. Coach Smith came to one of our practices. He watched me interact with teammates, saw how I responded to coaching, observed my work ethic. After practice, he pulled me aside. "Son, I don't care what anyone says about your attitude. I care about your character and your basketball ability. Both are outstanding." When Coach Smith offered me a full scholarship to UNC, it was the happiest day of my life up to that point. Jordan's expression darkened again, but it was also when the real threats started. The night after I committed to North Carolina, someone threw a rock through our living room window. There was a note tied to it. Marcus gasped. "What did it say?" "It said, 'Basketball boy thinks he's going to college. We'll see about that.'" My father found the rock before I did. That night, I heard him making angry phone calls. The next morning, he sat me down for a serious talk. "Son," he said, "there are people in this town who don't want to see you succeed. We need to be very careful from now on." "Are we in danger?" I asked. My father hesitated. "Maybe, but we're not going to let fear stop us from pursuing your dreams." Jordan's voice grew determined. "So we made a plan. I would finish my senior year somewhere else, somewhere safer." Marcus looked confused. "You transferred schools." "My parents enrolled me in a basketball prep school in Virginia. It was expensive, and it meant leaving home, but it was the only way to keep me safe and give me the best preparation for college." The decision to leave Wilmington broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes to how far some people would go to stop a black athlete from succeeding. Jordan glanced at the letter on the table. What I didn't know was that the most hurtful opposition would come from someone much closer to home. Someone who had been watching my entire journey. Someone who had access to information about my recruitment, my family, my fears. Marcus felt his heart racing. Who was it? Jordan's voice grew heavy with old pain. "That's what the letter I'm carrying will reveal. But first, you need to understand what happened to your father Tony when his turn came." Because by the time Tony tried out for varsity in 1984, I was already famous at UNC. But that fame didn't protect him from experiencing the same discrimination I had faced. And unlike me, Tony didn't have the national attention to force coaches to treat him fairly. Marcus set down his recorder for a moment, his hands trembling. "I need to know what happened to my father." Jordan nodded solemnly. "I'll tell you everything, Marcus. But first, let me finish the story of my senior year. Because what happened to me at prep school would later help me understand what your father went through." The prep school in Virginia was called Bridgeton Academy. It was a small private school that specialized in preparing athletes for college. Jordan described arriving at Bridgeton in August 1981, just before his senior year. He was homesick and nervous about being the only black student in most of his classes. The basketball coach at Bridgeton was a man named William Hayes. He was different from any coach I'd ever had. He was white, but he'd coached several black players who went on to successful college careers. Coach Hayes didn't care about my skin color. He cared about winning basketball games. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was being judged purely on my basketball ability. But even at Bridgeton, I encountered new forms of racism, more subtle but just as hurtful. Jordan explained how some teachers assumed he wasn't smart enough for advanced classes, despite his good grades from Laney. My English teacher, Mrs. Crawford, seemed surprised when I turned in well-written essays. She'd make comments like, "This is very good work, Michael. Did you get help with it?" When I applied for AP History, the guidance counselor suggested I take regular history instead. "AP might be too challenging for someone with your background," she said. What did she mean by my background? Jordan asked Marcus, though they both knew the answer. During basketball games, Jordan faced a different kind of hostility from opposing teams and their fans. Some opposing coaches would use racial slurs during games, thinking the referees couldn't hear them. Parents in the stands would make loud comments about my street ball style of play. But I also met other black athletes at Bridgeton who had faced similar challenges. We formed a brotherhood, supporting each other through the difficulties. Jordan's closest friend that year was Kevin Thompson, a basketball player from Detroit. Kevin was smart, funny, and incredibly tough. He'd grown up in a rougher neighborhood than I had, but he never let circumstances defeat him. One night, Kevin and I were talking about our experiences with racism in sports. He said something that stuck with me forever. "The difference between you and me, Mike," Kevin said, "is that you're good enough to change the game. Me, I'm just trying to survive it." Jordan's voice grew heavy. Kevin's words made me realize the responsibility that came with my talent. I wasn't just playing for myself anymore. Every black athlete who came after me would either benefit from my success or suffer from my failures. That was a heavy burden for an 18-year-old. Jordan described his senior season at Bridgeton as the best basketball of his young life. He averaged 25 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. College scouts called me the best high school player in the country. I was named to several All-American teams. But even as my basketball success grew, the racist letters continued. Someone had been tracking my movements, following my career from Wilmington to Virginia. The letters would arrive at Bridgeton, addressed to me personally. They contained the same threats, the same hateful language I'd received in North Carolina. Jordan's expression grew darker. Dr. Hayes, the headmaster at Bridgeton, called me into his office one day in February. "Michael," he said, "we've been getting some disturbing phone calls about you. Someone is very unhappy about your success." Dr. Hayes showed me copies of letters that had been sent to college coaches around the country. The letters claimed I was a troublemaker and not the kind of player you want representing your program. Marcus gasped. Someone was trying to sabotage your college career. Exactly. The letters were designed to make college coaches question my character, even though everyone who actually knew me could vouch for my behavior. Jordan described how Dr. Hayes handled the situation with remarkable determination. Dr. Hayes was a former FBI agent who had become an educator. He didn't take threats lightly. He told me he was hiring a private investigator to track down the source of the letters. Someone is working very hard to destroy your future, Michael. We're going to find out who it is. The investigation took weeks. The private investigator traced phone calls, analyzed handwriting, and interviewed people in both Wilmington and Virginia. Jordan's voice grew quiet. What he found shocked everyone, including me. The letters weren't coming from some random racist in town. They weren't coming from opposing fans or jealous parents. They were coming from someone who knew me personally, someone who had access to detailed information about my recruitment, my family, my schedule. Marcus was on the edge of his seat. Who was it? Jordan reached for the yellowed letter on the table, but didn't pick it up yet. The private investigator presented his findings to Dr. Hayes and my parents in March 1982. I was called into the meeting to hear what they'd discovered. When they told me who had been sending the letters, I couldn't believe it. I refused to accept it. But the evidence was overwhelming. Handwriting analysis, phone records, timing of the letters, everything pointed to the same person. Jordan's voice cracked slightly. It was someone I had trusted, someone I had respected despite our differences. Someone who claimed to care about basketball and young athletes. Marcus felt his heart pounding. Coach Herring. Jordan shook his head slowly. No, Marcus, it wasn't Pop Herring. He finally picked up the yellowed letter from the table. The person who tried to destroy my basketball career was someone much closer to home, someone whose motives were more complex than simple racism. Jordan looked directly at Marcus. Before I read you this letter, you need to understand that what it reveals will change how you think about forgiveness, justice, and the choices we make when we're young. Are you ready to hear the truth? Marcus nodded, though his hands were shaking. Jordan began to unfold the letter. This letter came from someone who believed they were protecting basketball from players like me. Someone who thought my style of play would ruin the game they loved. Someone who was terrified that basketball was changing, and I represented everything they feared about that change. Marcus held his breath as Jordan slowly unfolded the yellowed letter. The paper crackled with age. I'm going to read this letter to you exactly as it was written, Jordan said. But first, you need to understand that this letter is different from all the racist threats I received. This letter wasn't written by someone who hated me because I was black. It was written by someone who was genuinely confused and scared about what my success meant for basketball. Jordan cleared his throat and began to read. Michael, I've been watching you play for 3 years now. You're incredibly talented, there's no doubt about that. But I'm worried about what your success means for the game of basketball. When I started coaching, basketball was about fundamentals. It was about teamwork, discipline, and playing your role. Players like Bob Cousy and Jerry West were stars, but they never forgot they were part of a team. Your style of play is different. You're flashy. You take risks. You play like the team exists to showcase your individual talent instead of the other way around. I'm not writing this because I don't like you personally. I actually respect your work ethic and your character. But I'm afraid that if players like you become the standard, basketball will lose everything that makes it beautiful. Jordan paused and looked at Marcus. "Are you following this so far?" Marcus nodded, confused. "This doesn't sound like the racist letters you described before." "Exactly. This letter continues. I know this might seem unfair to you, but I believe that stopping your basketball career now might actually save the sport. Young players across the country are already trying to copy your style. They're focusing on individual moves instead of team fundamentals. If you succeed at the college level, and especially if you make it to professional basketball, you'll inspire thousands of other players to abandon the disciplined style of play that made basketball great. I don't expect you to understand this now. You're young and all you can see is your own dreams, but someone needs to think about the bigger picture. I'm sending letters to college coaches not because I hate you, but because I love basketball. I'm trying to preserve something precious that I fear is being lost. Please consider walking away from basketball voluntarily. You're smart and talented. You could succeed in many other fields. Basketball will be better off without your influence." Jordan folded the letter and set it on the table. The community center was completely silent. Marcus stared at the letter in shock. "Who wrote that?" Jordan's voice was barely a whisper. "It's signed someone who cares about the game." "But that's not a name. Who actually wrote it?" Jordan took a deep breath. The private investigator's handwriting analysis proved it came from Pop Herring. Marcus's jaw dropped. "Your high school coach wrote that?" "Yes, but do you see how different this letter is from the others? Pop Herring wasn't trying to stop me because he was racist. He was trying to stop me because he genuinely believed I would ruin basketball." Jordan explained that when the truth came out, it changed everything about how he understood his high school experience. Pop Herring grew up in the 1940s and 1950s, when basketball was a completely different game. It was slower, more methodical. Individual excellence was often seen as selfish. When he watched me play, he saw everything he thought was wrong with where basketball was heading. My athleticism, my creativity, my willingness to take over games, to him, that wasn't basketball anymore. Marcus struggled to process this information. But he was wrong, wasn't he? Your style of play made basketball more popular, not less. Of course he was wrong, but that's not the point of this story. Jordan's voice grew heavy with emotion. When I found out the truth about Pop Herring, I was 18 years old and about to start at UNC. I could have exposed him publicly. I could have ruined his career. Everyone would have supported me. But I made a decision that has haunted me for 45 years. Marcus leaned forward. "What did you do?" "Instead of exposing him, I confronted him privately. I went to his house the night before I left for college." Jordan described that difficult conversation in Pop Herring's living room. "I showed him the evidence. I told him I knew what he'd been doing." Pop Herring broke down crying. He apologized over and over. He said he never meant to hurt me personally. He said he just loved basketball the way it used to be and was terrified of seeing it change. He begged me not to expose him. He promised that if I kept his secret, he would give every black athlete a fair chance from then on. Jordan's voice cracked. "I was 18 years old and I believed in redemption more than I believed in justice, so I made a deal with him." "What kind of deal?" "I wouldn't expose him publicly, but he had to promise to change. He had to give every black player who came after me a fair opportunity." Jordan's expression grew pained. "And he kept that promise, Marcus. After I left for college, Pop Herring started several black players. He changed his coaching style. He embraced the evolving game. But here's the part that tears me apart. By protecting Pop Herring, I also protected a system that had hurt other black athletes before me. How many talented players never got their chance because I chose mercy over justice? How many kids were discouraged from playing basketball because they faced the same obstacles I did, but didn't have my talent to overcome them? Marcus felt overwhelmed. But coach, you were just 18. You did what you thought was right. Jordan shook his head. I made a choice that prioritized one man's redemption over systematic change, and the consequences of that choice affected other people for years to come. His voice grew even heavier, including your father. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Your father Tony came along 5 years later in 1984. Pop Herring had changed by then, but the damage to other black athletes had already been done. Tony was an incredible basketball player, Marcus. Good enough to play in college, maybe even professionally. But because I kept Pop Herring secret, Tony never got the attention he deserved from college scouts. Jordan's voice broke completely. The system I could have exposed and changed was still operating when your father needed it to be different. Marcus felt like the room was spinning. Tell me what happened to my dad. Jordan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Tony was a junior in 1984 when he tried out for the Laney varsity team. By then, I was already a star at UNC. Everyone in North Carolina knew my name. Tony was incredibly talented, Marcus. Maybe not quite at my level, but he was good enough to earn a college scholarship. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, could shoot from anywhere on the court, and had incredible court vision. Jordan's voice grew steady as he remembered Tony's abilities. Your father was also one of the smartest players I'd ever seen. He understood the game in ways that couldn't be taught. Tony dominated JV basketball his sophomore year. He averaged 22 points and 8 assists per game. College scouts were starting to notice him. But when tryouts for varsity came in November 1984, something terrible happened. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. What? Pop Herring had changed, like I said. He was giving black players fair opportunities, but he was still scared of athletic, creative players who reminded him of me. Tony played exactly like I did. Fast, aggressive, creative. When Pop Herring watched Tony during tryouts, he saw me all over again. Jordan's expression grew pained. Even though Pop Herring had promised to be fair, his old fears came rushing back. Tony represented the same style of basketball that Pop Herring had spent years trying to stop. So what did he do? He put Tony on JV for his junior year, despite Tony clearly being good enough for varsity. Jordan explained that Tony's situation was different from his own experience because the stakes were higher. When I was kept on JV, I still had 2 more years to prove myself. But Tony was a junior. College scouts usually make their decisions during a player's junior and senior years. By keeping Tony on JV his junior year, Pop Herring was essentially ending his college basketball dreams. Marcus felt sick. Didn't anyone speak up for my father? Tony's teammates knew he was good enough for varsity. Some parents complained to the school administration. But Pop Herring was a respected coach with 15 years of experience. When people questioned Tony's placement, Pop Herring used the same excuses he'd used with me. He needs to learn the system. He's not ready for varsity competition. Jordan's voice grew bitter. The local newspaper barely covered JV games. College scouts didn't come to watch JV players. Tony was essentially invisible. But here's the worst part, Marcus. I knew what was happening to your father. Marcus looked up sharply. You knew. Tony called me at UNC several times during his junior year. He told me about being kept on JV. He asked for my advice. Jordan's voice filled with regret. I should have spoken up publicly. I should have called reporters, contacted college scouts, done something to help Tony get the attention he deserved. Why didn't you? Because I was protecting Pop Herring's secret. If I had made a big deal about Tony's situation, people might have started asking questions about my own experience with Pop Herring. I was scared that exposing what happened to Tony would lead to exposing what Pop Herring had done to me, and I had promised to keep that secret. Jordan described the devastating consequences of his silence. Tony's junior year passed without any college interest. When his senior year came, he finally made varsity, but by then, it was too late. College scouts had already identified their recruiting targets. They'd spent Tony's junior year watching other players. Most scholarship opportunities were gone. Tony played brilliantly his senior year. He averaged 18 points and 6 assists per game, but only 2 small colleges offered him scholarships. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. What did he do? Tony chose academics over basketball. He accepted an academic scholarship to a small college in South Carolina. He never played competitive basketball again. Jordan's voice cracked. Your father was smart enough to understand what had happened to him. He knew that his basketball dreams had been sacrificed to protect my secret. But Tony never blamed me directly. Instead, he dedicated his life to making sure other young black athletes didn't face what he faced. Jordan explained how Tony became a teacher and coach after college. Tony spent 30 years mentoring young athletes. He taught them how to navigate systems that weren't built for them. He prepared them for the obstacles they'd face. Tony reached out to me several times over the years, not to complain about what happened to him, but to update me on the kids he was helping. He'd send me letters about talented players who were being overlooked. He'd ask me to call college coaches, to use my influence to help deserving kids get opportunities. Every letter was a reminder of what my silence had cost him, but Tony never asked for anything for himself. Jordan picked up the yellowed letter from the table. This letter isn't from Pop Herring, Marcus. This letter is from your father. Marcus gasped. My father wrote that. Tony wrote this letter in 1995 when he'd been teaching for 5 years. He'd been watching me succeed in professional basketball while continuing to help young athletes who faced the same obstacles we'd faced. Jordan's voice grew heavy. In this letter, your father asked me to do something I'd been avoiding for 13 years. What did he ask? He asked me to tell the truth about what happened to us in Wilmington, to expose the system that had hurt him and countless others. He said that my success gave me a platform to make real change. But as long as I stayed silent about my own experiences, that change would never come. Jordan looked directly at Marcus. Your father was right, Marcus. I had the power to help other young athletes avoid what he went through, but I chose to protect Pop Herring's reputation instead. That choice haunted me through my entire basketball career. Every time I succeeded, I wondered how many other Tony Williams were being overlooked in small towns across America. Jordan's voice filled with emotion. When Tony died in that car accident last year, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. His son, that's you, Marcus, was asking the same questions Tony had been asking for decades. Questions about fairness, about systematic discrimination, about the responsibility that comes with success. Marcus was crying now. My father never told me any of this. Because he was more interested in helping others than feeling sorry for himself, Jordan replied. Tony Williams was a better man than me, Marcus. He turned his disappointment into purpose. I turned mine into championships. Jordan stood up from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, kids were still playing basketball in the community center's gym. Your father's letter is the reason I agreed to meet with you today. It's time to honor his request. It's time to tell the truth. Jordan turned back from the window and sat down across from Marcus. He picked up the yellowed letter one more time. Let me read you what your father actually wrote to me in 1995. Marcus wiped his eyes and leaned forward. Jordan unfolded the letter carefully and began to read in Tony's words. Dear Michael, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been watching your success with the Chicago Bulls, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You've become everything we dreamed about when we were kids shooting baskets behind your house. But I'm writing because I think it's time to talk about what happened to us in Wilmington. Not for my sake, but for the kids who are facing the same obstacles right now. I've been teaching and coaching for 5 years now. Every semester, I meet talented Black athletes who remind me of us at that age. They have the same dreams, the same work ethic, the same potential. But too many of them are hitting the same walls we hit. Coaches who don't see their talent, systems that aren't designed for them to succeed, communities that aren't ready to embrace their excellence. Jordan paused and looked at Marcus. Your father was seeing the same patterns we'd experienced, but happening to a new generation. He continued reading. Michael, you have something I never had: a platform. When you speak, people listen. When you tell your story, it matters. I'm not asking you to do this for me. My basketball dreams ended a long time ago, and I've made peace with that. I'm asking you to do it for the kids who are still fighting. You could help coaches understand their unconscious biases. You could help parents recognize when their children are being treated unfairly. You could change the conversation about race and sports in America. I know it would be difficult to revisit those painful memories, but your silence is protecting the same system that hurt both of us. Jordan's voice grew emotional as he read the final paragraph. I'll understand if you choose not to speak out. You've earned the right to focus on your own career and family. But I wanted you to know that your story could be the key to unlocking opportunities for countless other young athletes. Your friend always, Tony Williams. Jordan folded the letter and set it down. The community center was completely quiet except for the distant sound of children playing. I received that letter right in the middle of the 1995 NBA season. The Bulls were defending champions. I was at the peak of my career. Marcus spoke quietly. What did you do? Nothing. I read it, felt guilty about it, and put it in a drawer. I told myself I was too busy, that speaking out might hurt my career, that Tony was asking too much of me. Jordan's expression grew pained. For the next 28 years, I carried that letter with me everywhere. It became a reminder of my failure to use my success for something bigger than myself. Your father sent me similar letters every few years. Always polite, never demanding, but always asking the same thing: would I consider telling our story? Jordan described how Tony's requests became more urgent over time as he saw the same patterns continuing. Tony would send me newspaper clippings about talented Black athletes being overlooked. He'd share stories about kids who quit sports because they faced too much discrimination. Each letter was evidence that the system we'd encountered was still operating, still hurting kids, still limiting opportunities based on race rather than talent. But I kept choosing silence. I told myself that my basketball success was helping black athletes by showing what was possible. But Tony knew better. Jordan stood up and walked to the small window again. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. In 2019, Tony sent me his final letter. It was different from all the others. Marcus looked up. How was it different? Tony told me he'd been diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure. His health was declining. He was starting to think about his legacy. In that letter, he wrote something that broke my heart. He said, "Michael, I spent my whole career helping individual kids navigate an unfair system, but I never helped change the system itself. That's my greatest regret." Jordan's voice cracked. Tony was blaming himself for not doing enough, when the truth was that I was the one with the platform to create real change. That letter also mentioned you, Marcus. Tony wrote about how proud he was that his son had become a journalist. He said you were asking the same questions about fairness and justice that he'd been asking for decades. Jordan turned back to face Marcus. When Tony died in that car accident last year, I realized I'd run out of time to honor his request while he was alive to see it. But then you called me. You said you were investigating racism in youth sports. You'd found those old newspaper articles that didn't make sense. It felt like Tony was speaking to me from beyond the grave. His son was asking the same questions he'd been asking for 30 years. Jordan sat back down and looked directly at Marcus. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Your father spent his life helping individual kids because I wouldn't help change the system. He died believing he hadn't done enough, when the truth was that I had failed him. Marcus was crying again. He never told me he'd been writing to you. Because Tony Williams was a humble man who didn't want credit. He just wanted justice for the next generation. Jordan picked up Tony's letter one more time. This letter changed my life, Marcus. Not when I first received it, but when I finally understood what your father was really asking of me. He wasn't asking me to relive painful memories for my own healing. He was asking me to prevent other kids from experiencing those same painful memories. Jordan's voice grew strong and determined. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell this story publicly, all of it. Pop Herring's letters, my decision to stay silent, what happened to your father. Some people won't like it. Some will say I should have stayed quiet. Others will say I should have spoken up decades ago. But your father was right, Marcus. My silence protected a system that continues to hurt young black athletes. It's time to break that silence. Marcus looked up through his tears. What do you want me to do with this story? Jordan smiled for the first time since they'd started talking. I want you to write it exactly as I told it to you. Don't make me look like a hero. Don't make Pop Herring look like a villain. Just tell the complicated truth. And I want you to make sure people understand that your father, Tony Williams, was the real hero in this story. He turned his disappointment into purpose. He spent his life fighting for other people's children. Jordan stood up and extended his hand to Marcus. Will you help me honor your father's request? Marcus stood up and shook Jordan's hand. Yes, sir, I will. They walked toward the exit of the community center together. The sounds of children playing basketball echoed through the hallways. Laughter mixed with the squeak of sneakers on polished floors. Jordan stopped at the gym doorway and watched the kids practice. Black children and white children played together, passing the ball without thinking about skin color. Look at them, Jordan said softly. They don't see race when they're playing. They just see teammates and opponents. Marcus stood beside him, watching the pure joy on the young faces. My father would have loved this. Tony did love this, Jordan replied. He spent his whole career creating opportunities for kids to play together like this. Jordan pointed to a young black boy who was clearly the best player on the court. "See that kid? Number 23. He reminds me of myself at that age." The boy was fast, creative, and fearless. He took shots other kids wouldn't attempt. He made passes that surprised everyone, including his coach. "But here's the difference," Jordan continued. "That boy's coach is encouraging his creativity. He's not trying to change his style or hold him back." Marcus watched as the coach, a middle-aged black man, gave the boy positive feedback after a spectacular play. "Your father helped train that coach," Jordan said. "His name is David Richardson. Tony mentored him for 10 years, teaching him how to develop young talent without crushing their spirit." Marcus felt a warm feeling in his chest. Even after death, his father's influence was still helping children. "David told me once that Tony taught him to see basketball as more than just a game," Jordan continued. "Tony said it was a tool for building character, confidence, and hope." They walked outside into the evening air. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. "Michael," Marcus said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you think my father ever resented you for the opportunities you had that he didn't get?" Jordan stopped walking and considered the question seriously. "I asked Tony that same question when I called him in 2010. I'd been feeling guilty for years about what happened to him." "What did he say?" "He said something I'll never forget. He told me, 'Michael, resentment is a poison you drink hoping it will hurt someone else. I chose a different path.'" Jordan leaned against his car. "Tony said that watching my success actually gave him hope. If one kid from Wilmington could make it to the highest level, then maybe the system could change for everyone." But he also said something else that stayed with me. He said, "The real tragedy isn't what happened to me. It's what happened to all the kids whose names we'll never know." Marcus understood. His father had always been more concerned about others than himself. "Tony kept a scrapbook," Jordan continued. "Every time one of his students got a college scholarship, every time a young athlete overcame obstacles, he'd add it to that book." "I saw that scrapbook when I helped clean out his house," Marcus said. "It was huge, hundreds of stories." That was Tony's real legacy. Not the basketball career he never had, but the lives he changed through teaching and coaching. Jordan opened his car door but didn't get in yet. "Marcus, there's one more thing I need to tell you about your father." "What's that?" "In his final letter to me, Tony wrote about you specifically. He said you had the same sense of justice that had driven him to keep fighting for fairness. He said that someday, you might be the one to tell the story he'd been trying to get me to tell." Marcus felt tears forming again. He knew I'd end up investigating this. "Tony was smart about people. He saw potential in you that maybe you didn't even see in yourself yet." Jordan got into his car and rolled down the window. "Your father also wrote that he hoped his son would understand that real success isn't about individual achievement. It's about using whatever platform you have to help others. That's why he became a teacher instead of pursuing basketball. That's why he spent 30 years mentoring young athletes. That's why he kept writing to me." Marcus nodded. "I understand now." "Your father's death was the wake-up call I needed," Jordan said. "I spent 40 years focused on my own success, while he spent the same 40 years focused on everyone else's." Jordan started his engine. "When you write this story, Marcus, make sure people understand that Tony Williams represents the best of what sports can teach us. He learned that winning isn't just about beating your opponent. It's about lifting up everyone around you." Marcus pulled out his business card and handed it to Jordan. I'll send you the article before it's published. I want to make sure I get your father's story right." "And Marcus," Jordan added, "when people read this story and start asking questions about racism in sports, remember what your father taught his students." "What's that?" "Change happens one person at a time, one story at a time, one conversation at a time. Your father changed hundreds of lives one student at a time." Jordan's car window rolled up, and he drove slowly out of the parking lot. Marcus stood alone outside the community center, holding his recorder. Inside, the children were still playing basketball, their voices echoing with joy and possibility. He thought about his father's 30-year mission to help young athletes navigate unfair systems. He thought about Jordan's 45 years of carrying guilt about his silence. Most of all, he thought about all the young athletes whose stories had never been told. The Tony Williams of the world who faced discrimination but never got the chance to speak their truth. Marcus looked back at the gym one more time. The kids were scrimmaging now, completely absorbed in the game. They played with the same passion and creativity that had gotten his father and Michael Jordan in trouble all those years ago. But now, that creativity was being celebrated instead of suppressed. Marcus smiled and walked to his car. He had a story to write. A story that would honor his father's memory and maybe, finally, create the change Tony Williams had spent his lifetime fighting for. As he drove away from the community center, Marcus could still hear the sound of basketballs bouncing and children laughing. The sound of hope. The sound of his father's legacy living on. The sound of Tony Williams' legacy continues to echo in gymnasiums across the country, where young athletes of all backgrounds now have mentors who understand that talent has no color and dreams deserve protection. We'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, untold stories that reveal the human side of sports and society. And don't keep this powerful message to yourself. Share this video with your friends and family. Stories like Tony Williams remind us that real change happens when we spread awareness and choose kindness over silence. Together, we can ensure that the next generation of athletes never has to choose between dreams and dignity. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.